Before we get into today's video, please quickly check to see if you're subscribed. It's totally free and allows you to never miss one of our stories. Omar Ahmad loved languages, the way most people love their pets, unconditionally and with occasional bouts of frustrated screaming. Currently, he was experiencing one of the latter moments as he tried to explain the nuances of fertilid formal grammar to his evening xenolinguistics class. No, he said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. The auxiliary verb goes before the temporal marker, not only in ceremonial contexts. Think of it like... He searched for an analogy that wouldn't make his students' eyes glaze over more than they already had. Think of it like those people who still say thee and thou at Renaissance fairs. A hand went up in the back. But, Professor Ahmad, why would aliens care about Renaissance fairs? Omar pinched the bridge of his nose. That's not what I mean. He was saved from having to explain the concept of analogies by a knock at the classroom door. The man who entered wore a suit that cost more than Omar's yearly salary. His shoes gleamed like polished obsidian, and his smile had probably been practiced in front of very expensive mirrors. Professor Ahmad? The man's voice carried the smooth confidence of someone used to telling an assistant what to do with his calls. Matthew Dezos, CEO of Dezos Technology. Mind if I borrow a moment of your time? Omar glanced at his students, most of whom were now far more interested in the famous tech mogul than anything involving auxiliary verbs. Class dismissed. Remember to review the temporal markers for next week. As the students filed out, many trying to sneak photos of Dezos with their phones, all Dezos brand, of course, Omar gathered his materials and tried to look professional. He'd done translation work for various companies before, but nothing involving someone of Dezos' caliber. What can I help you with, Mr. Dezos? Dezos settled into one of the student chairs with casual grace. Please, call me Matthew. I hear you're the best translator of fertilid formal language on Earth. Well, I wouldn't say. Your rates are also very reasonable compared to the corporate translation firms. Omar's mouth twisted. Ah, yes, well, academia doesn't exactly... I need you for a series of high-level trade negotiations. Dezos continued, as if Omar hadn't spoken. The Fertilid Trade Consortium controls most major shipping routes in this sector. We're trying to establish the first major human-alien trade agreement, getting our tech into their markets, specifically the new D-phone line. He pulled out one of the sleek devices and set it on Omar's desk. The consortium CEO, Botisarian, has agreed to preliminary talks, but their formal business language is... Dezos waved a manicured hand. Complex. Corporate translation, AI keeps mixing up crucial terms. Omar's academic interest perked up despite his reservations. Their business's dialect does have some fascinating quirks. The honorific system alone has 3 distinct... Yes, fascinating. Dezos interrupted. The point is, we need a human translator who understands all those quirks. Someone who won't accidentally insult their CEO's ancestor line or whatever it is these bugs care about. He named a figure that made Omar's eyes widen. Per day. Plus expenses. Omar stared at the number Dezos had written. That would cover his student loans. All of them. And his car. His house. With enough left over for... He forced himself to focus. When would these negotiations start? Tomorrow morning. Their delegation arrives at 9 a.m. sharp. Dezos stood, brushing imaginary dust from his perfect suit. I'll have a car pick you up at 7. Wear something... better. He gestured vaguely at Omar's tweed jacket with its worn leather elbow patches. Before Omar could form a response, Dezos was gone, leaving only the lingering scent of expensive cologne and the echo of that life-changing number. Omar sank into his chair, mind spinning. He should be excited. This was a huge opportunity, but something about the Fertilid formal language had been nagging at him. Certain phrases, certain structures that seemed oddly familiar. He needed to talk to Professor Roberts. His old mentor had retired last year, but she'd been the one who first got him interested in pre-contact alien languages. If anyone could help him make sense of this, it was Juliet. First, though, he apparently needed to find a better jacket. As he packed up his materials, his phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Car will pick you up at 7. Don't be late. Also, the tweed really has to go. MD." Omar looked down at his jacket again. "What's wrong with tweed?" he asked the empty classroom. Predictably, it didn't answer. The Dezos Technologies corporate headquarters lobby made Omar feel underdressed, despite his new suit. Everything gleamed with that particular shade of white that screamed, "We pay people very well to keep this clean." The chairs looked like they'd been designed by architects who'd never actually sat in a chair, and the potted plants had been interviewed to ensure they fit the company aesthetic. Matthew Dezos stood at the center of it all, somehow looking even more polished than yesterday. He was talking to a tall human woman in a slate gray business suit who kept checking something on her tablet. "Ah, Omar!" Dezos' smile remained fixed as his eyes scanned Omar's outfit. "Well, it's better than tweed." Omar resisted the urge to defend his old jacket again. The new suit was the best he could find on short notice, even if it did make him feel like a kid playing dress-up. "The consortium delegation just landed," the woman with the tablet said. "Their transport will be here in 10 minutes. "Excellent!" Dezos turned to Omar. "Remember, this is just a preliminary meeting. Keep things formal, respectful, and above all, don't let them think we're desperate for this deal." "Are you?" Omar asked before he could stop himself. Dezos' smile didn't waver. "We're eager to establish a mutually beneficial partnership. They're eager to maintain their monopoly on interstellar shipping. Just translate exactly what I say, and more importantly, how I say it." The woman's tablet chimed. "They're here." Omar had seen Fertilids in videos and photos, but nothing quite prepared him for meeting one in person. Boti's Bodhisarian filled the doorway, like a well-dressed boulder, his iridescent shell gleaming under the lobby lights. Unlike the mantis-like Fertilids Omar had studied, Boti's resembled a giant beetle in an expensive suit, complete with tiny glasses perched improbably on his face. Behind him came his son, Moslin, who did look like the mantis-like images from Omar's textbooks, all angles and precise movements. The contrast between father and son was striking. Where Botis dominated space, Moslin seemed to calculate exactly how much he needed and took only that. The third member of their party was short for a Fertilid, with the rounded features Omar associated with their worker caste. He carried several data pads and moved with the nervous energy of someone who expected to be blamed for anything that went wrong. "Greetings and profitable returns," Omar translated as Dezos began the formal welcome. So far, so good. Basic pleasantries were easy enough. Botiza's response, however, made Omar blink in surprise. The CEO formal Fertilid was archaic, almost ceremonial in its structure. More importantly, something about the specific phrases tickled Omar's memory. "He says," Omar paused, making sure he had it right. "He says, may our meeting prove worthy of the time value expended in its arrangement." That wasn't just formal language. That was ancient formal language. Omar had seen similar phrasing in pre-contact texts, but hearing it spoken.
"Tell him we're honored by his presence,"
Bezos said smoothly. Before Omar could translate, Bottice made a clicking sound that their translation software rendered as laughter.
"No need for such formality,"
he said in accented but clear English.
"I simply wished to test your translator skills. Impressive for what do you humans call it? A freelancer."
Omar felt his face heat. Of course they could speak English. They probably had hired universal translators too. This whole meeting was just a test, and he was the one being examined. Bezos' smile remained diplomatic, but Omar caught the slight tightening around his eyes.
"Professor Ahmad is one of Earth's foremost experts in xenolinguistics."
"How charming,"
Bottice said.
"You humans do try so hard to catch up. Shall we proceed to the meeting room? I have other appointments today."
As they followed the Fatila delegation, Omar noticed Moslin glancing back at him with an unreadable expression. The younger Fatilid's mandibles moved, and what might have been a smile or a threat display, Omar wasn't quite sure which. The meeting room's hollow screen displayed profit projections that made Omar's eyes water. He focused instead on the language being used, which was becoming more fascinating by the minute.
"As you can see,"
Bezos was saying,
"market penetration in the first quarter alone would—"
"A primitive design,"
Bottice interrupted, his mandibles clicking dismissively at the D-phone on the table.
"Our communications technology is far more advanced."
Omar translated this, then added under his breath to Bezos, "Though he used an archaic form of primitive that technically means worthy of study by the ancestors."
Bezos ignored him. "The D-phone isn't just a communications device. It's an entire ecosystem of apps, games, and social connectivity."
Omar watched in growing fascination as Bottice's formal responses became increasingly archaic. The CEO wasn't just being ceremonial now. He was using phrases Omar had only seen in ancient texts about trade regulations.
"He says our offering is—"
Omar hesitated. The phrase was incredibly old, and its modern meaning didn't quite match the original.
"Insufficient to warrant standard exchange protocols."
"Tell him our projected revenue streams,"
Bezos began, but Bottice cut him off again.
"I believe we are done here,"
the CEO said in English.
"Your species simply isn't ready for true galactic commerce. Perhaps in another century or two."
Moslin stirred for the first time since the meeting began.
"Father, perhaps we should consider—" "I have considered enough."
Bottice rose, his shell catching the light.
"We will maintain our existing arrangements. The human markets are too limited for our attention."
The legal advisor began gathering his datapads, chittering what sounded like ancient trade clauses under his breath. Omar's eyes widened as he caught fragments that seemed eerily similar to texts he'd studied with Professor Roberts.
"Mr. Bodhisarian,"
Bezos stood as well.
"Surely we can—"
"Good day, Mr. Bezos."
Bottice turned to leave, then paused.
"Oh, and do tell your translator that ancient linguistics is best left to actual scholars."
The delegation filed out, but not before Omar caught Moslin giving him another unreadable look. The legal advisor was last, still muttering what Omar was now certain were traditional contract phrases. As soon as the door closed, Bezos rounded on Omar.
"What was that about ancient linguistics?"
Omar's mind was racing.
"Some of their formal phrases. They're using an older version of their language, but I don't think they realize exactly how old or what it means."
"And this helps us how?"
"I need to check something,"
Omar said, already pulling out his phone.
"Their legal advisor was reciting something that sounded like—"
"I don't care about their legal advisor's poetry readings," Dazos snapped. I care about this deal falling apart before it even started. But Omar was barely listening as he scrolled through his contacts. He needed to talk to Professor Roberts immediately. The phrases he'd heard weren't just ceremonial language. They were fragments of ancient binding trade laws, laws that might still technically be in effect. Mr. Dazos, Omar said carefully. What if I told you there might be a way to force them back to the negotiating table? Dazos' eyebrows rose. I'm listening. I need to confirm something first. Give me 24 hours. You have 12. Dazos checked his watch. After that, I start looking for a new translator. Omar nodded and hurried out, his mind already composing questions for his old mentor. He was so preoccupied he almost ran directly into someone in the lobby. Oh, I'm sorry, I was just... He looked up to find Moslin Bodhisarian staring down at him. Fascinating discussion today, the younger Fatilid said softly. Particularly your interpretation of certain phrases. Omar swallowed. Just doing my job. Indeed. Moslin's mandibles twitched. I look forward to seeing how you do it tomorrow. He turned and strode away, leaving Omar with a distinct impression that he'd just been giving both a warning and an encouragement. But which was it? His phone buzzed, a text from Professor Roberts. Heard you were working with the trade consortium. Stop by for tea? I have something you might want to see. Professor Juliet Roberts' office hadn't changed since Omar's student days. Books and datapads still covered every surface in precisely organized chaos. The only difference was that it was now in her home, rather than the university, and the tea set was significantly nicer. So, she said, pouring a cup of something that smelled expensive. You finally noticed it too. Omar paused, with his cup halfway to his lips. And noticed what? Oh, don't play coy. Her eyes sparkled with the same enthusiasm that had made her xenolinguistics lectures famous. The Trade Consortium's formal business language, the one that sounds remarkably similar to certain pre-contact texts. You knew? Omar set his cup down. How long have you... Since first contact, she said cheerfully. The moment I heard their formal greeting protocols, I thought, well, that's interesting. Did you know I once wrote a paper on theoretical alien languages that got rejected for being too speculative? She shuffled through a stack of datapads, somehow knowing exactly which one she wanted despite the apparent disorder. Here we are. Look at this. She pulled up a holographic display of ancient text. This is from the archives we discovered in the Proxima Dig. And this, she swiped to another document, is the Trade Consortium's current standard contract template. Omar leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. But they're almost identical. Almost, Juliet agreed. The modern version is simplified, corrupted by thousands of years of use. But the core structures... She grinned. Did their legal advisor do the thing where he mutters ancient contract clauses under his breath? Yes. How did you... They all do that. It's tradition, but none of them know what they're actually saying anymore. She took a sip of tea. Rather like lawyers using Latin without knowing what habeas corpus literally means. Omar pulled out his own datapad. During the meeting today, Botes used this phrase. He played back the recording. Juliet's eyes widened. Oh my! That's not just ancient language, that's a binding rejection clause. If you responded with the proper counter phrase, you could have forced them into arbitration. What? Omar nearly spilled his tea. But that would mean that their entire modern trading system is built on ancient laws they've forgotten? Juliet's grin turned mischievous. Laws that are still technically in effect. Yes, rather amusing, isn't it? She stood and moved to a bookshelf, pulling out a weathered volume. The consortium loves to lord their economic power over younger species, but they've forgotten their own history. The modern Fertilid Trade Consortium emerged from the ashes of an older, much larger trading empire, one that collapsed so completely that the survivors lost most of their historical records. But we found those records, Omar said slowly, in the Proxima Dig. Exactly. She handed him the book. And unlike them, we actually bothered to translate everything, not just the parts that seemed immediately useful. Omar opened the book carefully. So if I learned the proper responses to these ancient phrases, you could potentially force them into honor trade agreements that predate their current monopoly. Juliet sat back down. Agreements that, by their own laws, supersede modern contracts. That's... Omar's mind raced with the implications. That's incredible, but also possibly dangerous. He looked up at his former mentor. Why are you telling me this now? She sipped her tea with exaggerated innocence. Perhaps I'm tired of seeing the consortium block Earth from fair trade deals. Perhaps I think it's time someone taught them a little humility. Her eyes twinkled. Or perhaps I just enjoy a good bit of academic mischief. And this has nothing to do with them rejecting your paper 20 years ago. Omar, she said with dignity, I am a respected scholar. I would never use ancient linguistic laws for something as petty as revenge. She paused. Though, if it happens to make certain people look foolish, well... She pulled out another book. Now, shall we review the proper pronunciation of pre-collapse trade declarations? I have a feeling you'll need them tomorrow. Omar glanced at his phone. He had 8 hours until Dezo's deadline. Yes, please. Excellent! Juliet opened the book with an air of someone setting up a particularly clever practical joke. Let's start with binding arbitration phrases. And Omar? Yes? Try not to look too smug when you use them. It ruins the effect. Omar arrived at the second meeting feeling considerably more confident, right up until he saw who was waiting in the lobby with Dezos. Will Bates looked like he'd been designed by the same architect responsible for the uncomfortable chairs, all sharp angles and gleaming surfaces. His suit probably cost more than Dezos, which Omar hadn't thought possible. Ah, the famous translator, Bates said, his smile as polished as his shoes. I hope you don't mind, but when I heard about this fascinating opportunity... What he means, Dezos said through clenched teeth, is that he invited himself. Matthew, please. Bates spread his hands. The consortium shipping routes could benefit all of Earth's tech companies. My new Bates book device is a pale copy of the D-phone. Dezos interrupted. Omar, a word. They stepped aside, leaving Bates to admire his reflection in the lobby's spotless windows. This changes nothing, Dezos whispered. You said you had a way to force negotiations. Omar nodded, patting the ancient texts he'd spent all night memorizing. Just try not to look surprised by anything I say. What's that supposed to... The lobby doors whooshed open, admitting the consortium delegation. If anything, Botis looked even more pompous today. His shell waxed to a mirror shine. Moslin followed, mandibles twitching in what Omar now recognized as amusement. The legal advisor scuttled in last, already muttering to himself. Ah, more humans, Botis said. How quaint. Will Bates. The rival CEO stepped forward. CEO of Bates Computing. I thought perhaps a broader discussion of Earth's technological offerings would be equally pointless, Botis finished. We have already expressed our position. Omar cleared his throat and spoke in ancient Fertilid. By the laws of the first traders, I invoke the right of secondary consultation. The room went very, very quiet. The legal advisor dropped one of his datapads. Moslin's mandibles stopped mid-twitch. Bottice turned all 4 eyes toward Omar.
What did you say?
Omar continued in the ancient tongue. When rejection is offered without consideration of mutual benefit, the ancient codes demand renewed discussion.
How dare you?
Bottice began, but the legal advisor was frantically tugging at his sleeve.
Sir,
The smaller Fatilid whispered urgently.
he's using pre-collapse legal phrases. If we deny the request,
We would be in violation of our own founding charter. Moslin finished, his voice carrying a note of what might have been respect. Dazos and Bates were staring at Omar like he'd just pulled a rabbit out of his hat. The first traders demand fair exchange. Omar pressed his advantage. To deny this is to deny the very foundations of commerce. The legal advisor was now practically dancing with anxiety.
sir, he's right. These are binding declarations. Our entire legal framework is based on...
I am aware.
Bottice snapped. His massive form seemed to deflate slightly.
Very well. We will continue discussions.
Omar caught Moslin hiding what was definitely a Fatilid equivalent smile behind one clawed hand. Let us proceed in accordance with the old ways, Omar said formally, then switched to English. The meeting room is this way. As they filed toward the conference room, Dazos grabbed Omar's arm. What did you just do? Use their own legal system against them. Omar whispered back. They literally can't refuse to negotiate now without violating laws older than their government. That's... Dazos' perfect smile cracked into something more genuine. That's brilliant. Don't celebrate yet. Omar warned. We still have to actually negotiate, and... He glanced at Bates, who was already trying to chat up Moslin about his Bates book's features. We might have complications. Nothing we can't handle, Dazos said confidently. You focus on the language. I'll handle the business. Omar nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get much more complicated. The ancient texts had been very clear about one thing. Once you invoked the old ways, you had to see them through to the end. He just hoped nobody asked about the traditional blood sacrifices to seal the deal. Professor Roberts had assured him those were purely ceremonial, and that the modern Fatilids will have surely forgotten about them. But you can never be quite sure. The afternoon's negotiations had devolved into what Omar could only describe as an ancient ritual food fight. As the first trader's decree, he translated as Dazos made another pitch. Our offering brings new paths to prosperity.
Such paths are worthless without proper foundation.
Bottice responded, still clearly irritated at being forced to use the old forms.
As decreed by 7th Expansion Accords.
The legal advisor's mandibles were clicking so fast as he recorded everything that he sounded like a tap dancer with anxiety issues. If I may, Bates cut in smoothly. The Bates book interface is much more intuitive for Fatilid appendages. The chamber recognizes no new voices until primary exchange is concluded, Omar said in ancient Fatilid, then blinked in surprise at his own boldness. Moslin didn't quite manage to suppress his laugh this time. The legal advisor actually looked up from his datapads, all 4 eyes wide with shock.
Did your translator just invoke the silence of preliminary exchange?
He asked in English. Is that significant? Dazos asked innocently, as if he and Omar hadn't spent 20 minutes before the meeting specifically discussing this ancient rule.
It means,
Bottice rumbled dangerously,
that until our primary negotiation concludes, no other offers may be entertained.
He gave his son a sharp look.
Stop enjoying this.
Of course, Father. Moslin's mandibles twitched, though I cannot help but admire the traditional approach. Omar kept his face carefully neutral, as he remembered Professor Roberts' late-night lesson. The ancient Fatilids were sticklers for procedure. Use that. She had been right, as usual. Now then, Dazos continued smoothly, about our distribution proposal. A sharp chime interrupted him. The legal advisor checked one of his data pads and chittered in alarm.
Sir,
He addressed Botiz.
the Trade Commission is interested in our proceedings.
Botiz's shell actually dulled slightly.
What? It seems,
The advisor continued nervously.
that invoking the old ways automatically notified certain oversight committees. Impossible.
Botiz snapped.
Those systems were deactivated centuries ago. Apparently not, sir. And according to these readings,
The advisor's voice dropped to a whisper.
the ancient archives are activating.
Omar tried very hard to look like he knew exactly what that meant. Judging by the way Moslin was staring at him, he wasn't entirely successful.
The archives!
Botiz's voice cracked slightly.
But that would mean
All pre-collapse trade routes are technically back in play. Moslin finished, not even trying to hide his satisfaction now, including the ones Earth's system intersects with. The legal advisor was now surrounded by floating holographic displays, ancient texts scrolling across them faster than Omar could read.
Sir, the Commission is requesting an immediate review of our current route monopolies in light of historical precedent.
Botiz's massive head swiveled toward Omar.
You knew about this.
Omar managed what he hoped was a diplomatic shrug. I just followed the traditional forms, as any proper translator would.
Father,
Moslin said quietly, perhaps we should consider a more cooperative approach before the Commission decides to examine our other holdings as well. For a moment, Omar thought Botiz might actually explode. The CEO's shell was changing colors rapidly, cycling through what Omar recognized as the Fatilid equivalent of a fury rainbow. Instead, Botiz did something worse. He laughed.
well played,
He said to Omar.
Very well played indeed. Your professor taught you well.
Omar stiffened. I don't know what you...
Please!
Botiz waved a dismissive claw.
Robert's work on pre-collapse linguistics is required reading for our legal department, though I doubt she even knew about the archive protocols.
He turned to Dazos.
Your translator has forced my hand quite effectively. Shall we discuss actual terms?
As the first traders intended, Omar said formally, not quite hiding his own smile now.
Indeed.
Botiz's mandibles clicked.
Though I hope you're prepared for the traditional negotiations. The old ways can be quite demanding.
Omar's smile froze. That sounded ominously like what Professor Roberts had warned him about, just before he'd left her house. Oh, and if they actually agree to negotiate the old way, try not to look too nervous during the ritual of competitive value assessment. What's wrong? Dazos whispered. Nothing. Omar whispered back. Just wondering if that new suit is fireproof. What? Don't worry about it. Omar straightened his glasses. Let the traditional exchange begin. The legal advisor began to laugh nervously. It wasn't very reassuring. Omar stared at the ritual combat arena, which had apparently been hidden behind a perfectly normal-looking wall in the Dazos Technologies building all along. You knew about this? He asked Dazos. All major corporate headquarters had them installed after first contact, Dazos replied, adjusting his tie. Though we didn't really know why. They demanded it for some of the very early deals that ensured we at least held on to Earth's economy. We just used them for team-building exercises.
The arena itself looked like someone had combined a sumo ring with a corporate boardroom. Traditional Fertilid symbols lined the walls, while stock tickers scrolled across holographic displays. The floor was divided into sectors labeled with ancient trade terms that Omar was fairly certain weren't supposed to be taken literally. At least, he hoped the pit of profit margins was metaphorical.
The ritual of competitive value assessment is simple,
the legal advisor explained, now somehow wearing ceremonial robes over his business attire.
Each party demonstrates their worth through traditional challenges.
Right, Omar said weakly. And these challenges are...
Combat, of course!
Bottis boomed cheerfully. He'd become disturbingly enthusiastic about the whole thing once he'd realized Omar couldn't back out without invalidating his own invocation of ancient law.
Combat,
Dezos repeated flatly.
Oh, not physical combat,
Moslin assured them.
That would be uncivilized. No, these are battles of business acumen. Though traditionally performed while standing in ceremonial flame pits.
The flame pits are optional,
the legal advisor added quickly, seeing Omar's expression.
We usually just use heated floors these days. Human resources insisted.
How considerate,
Omar muttered.
I volunteer as the human champion.
Bates stepped forward, having somehow acquired his own ceremonial robe.
My quarterly earnings clearly show the chamber still recognizes no new voices.
Omar snapped an ancient Fertilid, starting to find that particular rule very useful.
You can't keep doing that,
Bates protested.
Actually, he can,
the legal advisor said.
The old ways are quite strict about preliminary negotiations, though I should warn you.
He turned to Omar.
That rule expires after the third round of ritual challenge.
Then we'd better finish this in 2 rounds,
Dezos said grimly. He'd removed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing arms that suggested he'd spent more time in the corporate gym than Omar had expected.
Indeed,
Bottis clapped his massive claws together.
Moslin will represent the consortium as his right as heir. The first challenge is the dance of deprecating assets.
Omar translated this twice to make sure he'd heard correctly.
The dance.
Of course, Moslin said, already removing his outer robe to reveal surprisingly flexible-looking business wear.
How else would one demonstrate mastery of tax law?
Omar looked desperately at his phone, but Professor Roberts had chosen this exact moment to stop responding to his texts. Her last message just read, "Don't forget to point your toes during the deprecation calculations." She ended it with a wink emoji.
The rules are simple,
the legal advisor continued.
Each participant must demonstrate their understanding of corporate finance through interpretive movement. Points are awarded for technical accuracy and artistic interpretation. The flame pit temperature increases with each successful calculation.
That's insane,
Omar said.
That's business,
Dezos replied, already stretching.
Though usually with fewer ritual dance numbers.
Omar wondered why he seemed so calm about the ritual. He can't have prepared for in advance.
Father,
Moslin said formally,
I request the traditional music.
Bottis nodded solemnly and pressed a button on his datapad. The arena filled with what sounded like a cross between a corporate retreat team building playlist and ancient Fertilid war drums.
The dance begins!
The legal advisor announced.
First position, quarterly revenue projection!
Omar watched in horrified fascination as Dezos and Moslin began what had to be the galaxy's most aggressive interpretive dance battle. Moslin moved with insectoid grace, his movements describing complex financial maneuvers. Bezos, to his credit, managed to keep up, though his style was more MBA graduate with surprising breakdancing experience.
Point to the humans!
The advisor called as Bezos stuck a particularly difficult landing while simultaneously calculating compound interest.
Temperature increasing by 5 degrees!
Is this really necessary?
Bates asked from the sidelines.
The chamber still continues to recognize no new voices,
Omar said, starting to enjoy that phrase a little too much.
When this is over,
Bates began.
You'll what?
Omar surprised himself by saying,
File a strongly worded interpretive dance protest?
Before Bates could respond, a chime sounded through the arena. The legal advisor checked his datapad and chittered in excitement.
The Trade Commission observers are most impressed with the traditional approach. They've granted preliminary approval for route-sharing negotiations.
Ha! Bezos executed a perfect pivot while demonstrating market volatility calculations.
Take that! The dance is not yet complete,
Moslin warned, his mandibles clicking in time with the rhythm.
And the second challenge involves futures trading through competitive haiku.
Omar pulled out his phone again and sent a desperate text to Professor Roberts.
You could have warned me about the dancing.
Her response came immediately.
And miss the fun? Besides, wait until you see the traditional hostile takeover limerick competition.
This time, she used a smiling devil emoji.
I hate everything,
Omar muttered, then straightened up to announce the next set of movements. At least he wasn't the one who had to dance, though judging by the way the legal advisor was eyeing him, that might change soon enough. After the haiku battle, which Bezos won by somehow working synergistic market disruption into 5 syllables, Omar found himself in what had to be the strangest corporate meeting of his life, and he'd once had to translate a merger agreement with a species that communicated entirely through spore release. The legal advisor's datapads were now floating in a ceremonial pattern around the conference table, displaying ancient trade routes that intersected with Earth's solar system. Most of them, Omar noticed, ran straight through what the consortium currently claimed as exclusive territory.
The first trader's paths cannot be denied,
Omar translated, as Bezos made his point.
The ancient routes are open to all who follow the old ways.
Technically correct,
Bottiz growled. The CEO had removed his outer robe after the dance battle, but still managed to look imposing in what appeared to be ceremonial business casual.
But modern safety regulations
are superseded by pre-collapse statute 47-B.
Omar interrupted, then quickly added,
with all due respect to the honored exchange partner.
The legal advisor nearly dropped his ceremonial stylus.
He knows the statutes by number?
Professor Roberts was very thorough,
Omar said diplomatically, neglecting to mention the fact that he'd spent most of the previous night memorizing ancient legal codes while hopped up on energy drinks.
Father,
Moslin said carefully.
He is right. The archives clearly show these routes were meant to be shared. Our current monopoly is technically illegal.
Under laws that haven't been enforced in centuries,
Bottiz protested.
The old ways do not recognize temporal limitations,
Omar quoted. Professor Roberts had been very specific about that phrase.
I believe,
Bezos said smoothly,
this puts us in a strong position to discuss fair access agreements, unless you'd prefer we take this to the Trade Commission.
Bottiz's shell changed colors rapidly, before settling into what Omar recognized as the fertilid equivalent of resigned irritation. "Perhaps," the CEO began, but was interrupted by the conference room door flying open.
"This is outrageous!"
Will Bates stormed in, having apparently found time to change into his own set of ceremonial robes.
"I demand to be included in these negotiations under the ancient right of commercial opportunity."
Omar blinked in surprise. That was actually a correct invocation of old law. The legal advisor consulted his datapads.
He's not wrong. The preliminary period has ended. New voices must be recognized.
"I've been doing my own research,"
Bates said smugly.
"and I have my own translator now."
A familiar figure stepped through the door behind him. "Hello, Omar," Professor Roberts said cheerfully. "Hope you don't mind some competition." Omar stared at his mentor in betrayal.
"You're working for Bates."
"Oh, don't look so shocked." She adjusted her own ceremonial robes, which somehow included elbow patches. "Academic funding isn't what it used to be. Besides," her eyes twinkled, "this makes the game more interesting."
"This isn't a game,"
Dezos protested.
"This is a serious business negotiation."
"With competitive haiku," Juliet quoted in perfect ancient fertilid. "The old ways demand proper entertainment value."
"Speaking of entertainment,"
Moslin interjected,
"we still have the traditional hostile takeover limerick competition to complete."
Bates and Dezos both turned to him.
"The what?"
"The what?"
Oh, yes!
the legal advisor said, brightening considerably.
A 5-round elimination tournament in ancient fertilid verse, of course, with interpretive dance accompaniment.
"And the flame pit temperature doubles for each round,"
Moslin added helpfully. Bates looked at his newly hired translator.
"You didn't think to warn me about this part?"
"And spoil the surprise," she grinned. "Besides, iambic pentameter isn't that hard."
"That's not even the right poetic form."
The chamber recognizes the challenge must proceed,
Bottice said formally, clearly enjoying the other's discomfort.
All voices now heard must participate.
"Wait,"
Bates said, his smugness fading.
"What do you mean, participate?"
"Hope you've been practicing your dance moves," Juliet said cheerfully. "The traditional steps for hostile takeover proceedings are quite vigorous." Omar watched as the color drained from both CEOs' faces. Even Moslin looked somewhat concerned.
The flame pit,
the legal advisor announced,
is now prepared for round 3.
As everyone was ushered back toward the arena, Omar's phone buzzed, a text from Professor Roberts, despite her standing right next to him. "Told you this would be fun." He could practically hear her smirking. The flame pit's heat made Omar's glasses fog up as 4 corporate executives attempted to out-limerick each other about market share acquisition strategies. Professor Roberts, naturally, was providing musical accompaniment on what appeared to be a ceremonial fertilid percussion instrument she'd produced from somewhere in her robes.
"There once was a merger most wise,"
Bates chanted while executing a surprisingly competent spin.
Traditional form violation,
the legal advisor called out.
Earth limericks do not qualify. 5 points deducted.
"But I'm not finished,"
Bates protested as he narrowly avoided colliding with Moslin's interpretive representation of a stock portfolio diversification.
"The chamber recognizes only pre-collapse poetic structures."
Omar translated as Bottice made another attempt at the traditional verse. The CEO's shell was starting to look distinctly scorched around the edges.
Omar!
Bezos gasped between movements.
A little help with the translation?
The trader who seeks outside aid, Juliet quoted with obvious enjoyment, forfeits points to their honored opponents.
Not helping.
Bezos barely managed to dodge Botice's aggressive demonstration of vertical integration principles. The legal advisor's datapads were now arranging themselves into complex geometric patterns above the arena, ancient trade routes forming a three-dimensional map of corporate territory disputes. Omar noticed something odd about the display.
Professor,
He whispered.
look at the overlap between the ancient routes and modern holdings.
Ah, you've spotted it too. She adjusted her ceremonial elbow patches. The consortium didn't just monopolize the trade routes, they actively redrew them to hide the old paths. Quite illegal under the old ways, even more illegal under modern law, actually. A chime sounded through the arena. The legal advisor checked his primary datapad and chittered in alarm.
Sir,
He called to Botice.
the Trade Commission has completed their preliminary review of the archives. They're calling for an immediate audit of all current route holdings.
Botice stumbled mid-calculation, nearly falling into the flame pit.
What?
It seems, Moslin said, executing a perfect pivot that somehow represented quarterly earning projections,
That our attempt to maintain tradition has backfired rather spectacularly.
This is your fault.
Botice rounded on Omar, who took a prudent step backward.
You and your professors meddling in things you don't understand.
The chamber recognizes the honored trader's emotional response, Juliet quoted calmly, but reminds all parties that physical intimidation violates Section 12 of the Preliminary Exchange Protocols.
They're right, Father.
Moslin said.
We have to either share the routes willingly or have them forcibly redistributed by the Commission.
There is
The legal advisor offered tentatively.
one other option, the ritual of mutual compromise.
Omar's eyes widened. He read about that one. It was somehow even more ridiculous than the limerick competition.
No,
Botice said firmly.
absolutely not. I will not participate in.
The ancient potluck of reconciliation. Juliet finished, her eyes twinkling. But it's the only way to satisfy both the old ways and modern regulations without losing face.
I'm sorry.
Bezos interrupted, still slightly out of breath from his last interpretive market analysis.
The ancient... what now?
Potluck, Omar explained.
Technically, a ritual feast where all parties bring traditional dishes representing their business philosophies.
The symbolism is quite elegant, actually.
The legal advisor added.
Breaking bread together while making up monopolies.
And
Moslin noted shrewdly.
it will let us negotiate new terms without the Commission's direct oversight.
Botice's mandibles worked furiously as he considered the options.
The terms would have to be favorable.
The first traders valued fair exchange above all,
Omar quoted.
even in matters of cuisine.
Botice exploded.
Did you seriously just quote the ancient constitution's lunch protocols at me?
The old ways are very specific about proper meal etiquette, Juliet said. I once wrote a fascinating paper on the ritual significance of appetizer placement in pre-collapse business lunches.
That got rejected for being too speculative.
Omar asked. No, that one was published. The rejected one was about traditional dinner napkin folding techniques
and their impact on early trade negotiations. The legal advisor gasped.
You're the author of Dining for Dollars, a comprehensive analysis of pre-collapse corporate food rituals. I cited that in my graduate thesis.
Focus, please. Bezos cut in. Are we actually considering solving this with a potluck dinner? Unless you prefer another 5 rounds of hostile takeover limericks, Bates muttered, nursing what looked like a dance-related pulled muscle. Omar looked at the still-smoking flame pit, as the heated tiles had actually exceeded their safe operating temperature. Cheap garbage hidden underneath the fancy cleanliness. Then, at his phone, where Professor Roberts' previous warnings about traditional ritual requirements still sat unanswered. A nice, quiet business dinner suddenly sounded pretty good. Even if, according to ancient texts, the traditional centerpiece was supposed to be a live Attila delicacy that was technically still illegal in 3 sectors.
The chamber moves to invoke the ritual of mutual compromise,
Baptiste said formally.
Seconded,
Moslin said quickly.
Motion carried,
The legal advisor announced with obvious relief.
The ancient potluck will commence in 3 standard days.
Wonderful! Juliet clapped her hands. I know this lovely little place that still serves traditional pre-collapse delicacies, though we may need to get some special permits. Omar had a feeling the potluck was going to make the limerick competition look positively normal by comparison. At least the food would probably be better than the corporate cafeteria's usual offerings. Probably. The ancient potluck of reconciliation was being held in what had apparently been a secret ceremonial dining hall the entire time. Omar was starting to suspect that corporate headquarters had more hidden ritual chambers than actual offices. The chamber recognizes these offerings as appropriately traditional, he announced, surveying the spread. The centerpiece was indeed a live Attila delicacy, though Professor Roberts had somehow managed to get it cleared through customs as a cultural education specimen. I still can't believe we're doing this, Bezos muttered, adjusting his ceremonial napkin. Better than another dance battle, Bates said, still walking a bit stiffly from his limerick-related injuries. Baptiste presided at the head of the table, his massive form draped in what appeared to be a ceremonial dinner jacket. Moslin sat to his right, mandibles twitching occasionally as he eyed the various dishes.
The first traders knew,
the legal advisor intoned,
that true commerce flows through the stomach as well as the marketplace.
That's not a real quote, Omar whispered to Juliet. Actually, it is, she whispered back. From the appendix on appropriate business lunches, right after the section on proper soup spoon placement. The ancient texts had a section on soup spoons. The old ways were very thorough about table settings. The live centerpiece chose that moment to make a break for freedom. Moslin caught it with practiced ease. As is traditional, he said formally, then took a bite. Omar was very glad he brought backup sandwiches.
Now then,
Baptiste said after everyone had served themselves from their respective traditional offerings.
Let us discuss terms.
The first traders recommended starting with appetizers, Juliet quoted innocently. The legal advisor nearly choked on his ceremonial water.
Professor Roberts, I've studied your work on pre-collapse dining etiquette for years. It is an honor to finally...
Yes, Baptiste interrupted. We're all very impressed. But what about these trade routes? They negotiated between courses, ancient tradition mixing seamlessly with modern business talk. Omar found himself actually enjoying the back and forth, especially now that nobody was being forced to dance. So, Bezos said, examining what might have been some kind of traditional fatillid bread. we get access to the major routes through the Sol sector,
with appropriate profit sharing.
Moslin added quickly.
And oversight of safety protocols.
Bottice rumbled around a mouthful of something Omar had decided not to identify.
While we,
Bates continued,
agree to collaborate on distribution rather than compete, the first traders smile upon mutual benefit.
Omar translated, then helped himself to another sandwich.
You know,
the legal advisor said thoughtfully,
this is actually rather pleasant compared to our usual negotiation methods.
What? No interpretive dance? Juliet asked innocently.
I meant the endless committee meetings and paperwork, though I suppose we'll still need some of that.
The old ways require only one witness and shared meal to seal the deal,
Omar quoted.
That's...
Bottice paused.
Actually correct. Technically, this dinner legally constitutes a binding contract under pre-collapse law,
which the Trade Commission has now formally reinstated,
Moslin added with obvious satisfaction.
All this time, Bates mused, we could have been doing business over dinner instead of in boardrooms.
The ancient Fatilids knew what they were doing, Juliet said. Nothing brings people together quite like food, even if some of it is still moving. The centerpiece made another escape attempt. This time Omar was pretty sure it was aiming for the door.
You planned this,
he said to his former mentor.
Right from the start.
I have no idea what you're talking about, she replied, her eyes twinkling. I just thought it'd be fun to shake things up a bit, and if it helped Earth get a fair deal while teaching the consortium some humility. She shrugged. Academic pursuits can have practical applications.
The Chamber recognizes the professor's wisdom,
the legal advisor said formally,
and requests a recipe for these excellent traditional appetizers.
Oh, those aren't traditional at all, Juliet said cheerfully. They're just really good spring rolls. The old ways never said everything had to be authentic, just symbolically appropriate. Omar couldn't help but laugh. All the ritual combat, all the formal negotiations, and in the end, it came down to good food and better company.
To fair exchange.
He raised his glass in the traditional manner.
And to new traditions.
Everyone joined the toast, even the centerpiece, which had apparently given up on escaping and decided to join the party instead, even with chunks of itself missing, which Omar noted were actively regrowing from green, goopy wounds.
Ugh.
You know, Dezo said afterward,
we should do this for all our major negotiations.
Agreed,
said Bates.
Though maybe with less interpretive dance next time. The Chamber recognizes that motion,
Omar said, finding he was actually going to miss using that phrase. But not as much as he'd miss his old tweed jacket. Maybe it was time to start a new tradition, one that appreciated good, comfortable clothes as much as good, comfortable business dealings. After all, the old ways were all about adaptation, even if they did sometimes require competitive poetry about corporate mergers. As if reading his mind, his phone buzzed with one last text from Professor Roberts. Even though she was sitting right next to him, those Gen Zers really did have an obsession with texting.
See? Told you ancient linguistics would be useful in the real world.
He couldn't argue.